Microsoft Copilot Studio for HR Automation, Real Use Cases and Setup. Welcome back. Today's topic is Microsoft Copilot Studio for HR Automation, Real Use Cases and Setup. We'll cover what you actually need to know about Copilot Studio use cases. Now, let's talk about what is Microsoft Copilot Studio and why HR teams are using it. Microsoft Copilot Studio is a low-code platform for building AI agents that connect to your existing Microsoft 365 environment. It sits on top of the Power Platform, integrating natively with SharePoint, Teams, Outlook, and Dataverse. According to Microsoft's official Copilot Studio documentation, agents can query internal knowledge bases, trigger automated workflows, and escalate to humans when queries fall outside defined scope. HR teams adopt it because it removes the need for full application development. You configure knowledge sources, define conversation flows, and publish to teams in days. The platform supports both structured conversation flows and generative AI responses grounded in your own documents. A policy question gets answered from your actual HR handbook, not a generic model knowledge base. That distinction matters when employees ask about specific leave entitlements or disciplinary procedures. Standard chatbots answer from fixed FAQ scripts. Copilot Studio agents query SharePoint libraries, pull records from Dataverse, trigger Power Automate flows, and escalate to a human when a question falls outside defined scope. That is a meaningfully different capability and the core reason HR teams find it more useful than general-purpose AI chat tools. Now, 7 Copilot Studio use cases for HR automation. These are the 7 Copilot Studio use cases HR teams prioritize most. Each is deployable within a standard Copilot Studio environment without custom application development. New hires have predictable questions during their first 2 weeks: where to submit bank details, how to access benefits, who approves equipment requests. An onboarding agent handles all of these from a single Teams interface. Load onboarding documentation into SharePoint, connect Copilot Studio to that library, and the agent answers in real time. A Power Automate flow can send the IT provisioning request automatically when the hire confirms their start date. Policy documents are long and employees rarely read them end to end. The result is that HR answers the same 5 questions daily. A policy Q&A agent trained on your handbook, leave policies, and code of conduct fields 80 to 90% of these queries without human involvement. This is one of the most deployable Copilot Studio agent use cases because the ROI shows up immediately in reduced ticket volume. Let's talk about how to set up Copilot Studio for HR, a practical starting point. Setup takes longer than vendor demos suggest. Most of that time goes into knowledge source preparation, not agent configuration. Here is a realistic 5-step sequence for HR teams. Pick one use case. Define the specific questions the agent must answer and the actions it should take. Write these out as conversation scenarios before opening Copilot Studio. Teams that skip this step typically spend more time reconfiguring agents mid-build than teams that scoped carefully up front. Copilot Studio ingests SharePoint documents, public URLs, and custom data connectors. For an HR policy agent, upload documents to a dedicated SharePoint library. Remove outdated versions, standardize formatting, and give each document a clear descriptive title. This directly affects answer quality more than any configuration setting. Let's talk about why Power Automate makes Copilot Studio more than a Q&A amp. A tool. Copilot Studio handles conversation. Power Automate handles action. Used alone, Copilot Studio is a sophisticated FAQ tool. Connected to Power Automate, it becomes a workflow engine. For HR, that distinction matters because most use cases involve both information retrieval and a downstream system action. The integration is native. You create a Power Automate flow, expose it as an action in Copilot Studio, and the agent calls it based on conversation context. Organizations with existing Power Platform governance frameworks find this setup straightforward. Teams starting fresh need to define approval chains and data access permissions before connecting agents to live systems. If your team is evaluating broader Microsoft infrastructure alongside Copilot Studio, an Azure Infrastructure Assessment or Azure Architecture Review gives you a full picture of your environment before committing to an automation roadmap. Many organizations also find that a hybrid cloud Azure setup or Azure landing zone implementation is a prerequisite for enterprise-scale AI agent deployment, particularly when agents need to access on-premise HR systems through secure connectors. Now, moving on to governance and compliance, the HR data problem you cannot ignore. HR data is sensitive. Salary information, disciplinary records, medical leave details, these are not documents you want an agent retrieving without strict access controls. Copilot Studio respects SharePoint permissions, so agents only surface content the querying user is authorized to see. Audit your SharePoint permissions before connecting HR documents to any agent. Human-in-the-loop governance ensures human approval at every deployment stage, which is the right model for HR automation where agent actions affect employment status. Build escalation paths into every agent. Define what the agent cannot do and enforce those limits at the configuration level, not just in the system prompt. An Azure security assessment combined with a review of your Microsoft 365 data classification policies gives you the foundation for a compliant Copilot Studio deployment. According to Microsoft's 2024 Work Trend Index, 75% of knowledge workers now use AI tools at work, and HR data governance is consistently the top compliance concern organizations raise during AI tool evaluations. For teams in regulated industries such as healthcare, banking, or financial services, treating governance as a prerequisite rather than a follow-up step makes a material difference in deployment outcomes. Let's talk about now how Q Services deploys Copilot Studio for HR teams. Q Services is a Microsoft-certified solutions partner specializing in Azure and the Power Platform. We have completed 500+ Azure and Microsoft platform projects since 2014, delivering Azure consulting services for clients in healthcare, logistics, SaaS, banking, and financial services. Our Copilot Studio engagements start with a Microsoft Platform Readiness Assessment that maps your Microsoft 365 environment, identifies data readiness gaps, and defines your governance framework before a single agent is built. We then handle SharePoint knowledge architecture, Power Automate flow development, and Teams deployment configuration. For clients with broader infrastructure needs, we work as an Azure migration partner supporting Azure Cloud Migration Services, Azure App Modernization, and lift and shift to Azure workloads alongside automation investments. Our Azure DevOps consulting services and Azure Cost Optimization Consulting help organizations manage growing cloud footprints efficiently. Clients evaluating a migrate on-premise to Azure strategy benefit from our Azure Managed Services Provider practice, which provides ongoing monitoring and optimization after migration completes. Let's talk about next up, conclusion. Copilot Studio use cases in HR are delivering measurable results. Organizations deploying agents for policy Q&A, onboarding, and leave management report ticket volume reductions within the first 30 days of operation. The platform is accessible without a development team, but the highest value deployments pair Copilot Studio with Power Automate, a well-prepared SharePoint knowledge base, and a clear governance framework that protects sensitive HR data. If you're ready to move from evaluation to deployment, start with a structured scoping session. Talk to a Copilot Studio specialist at Q Services to map your HR use cases, assess your Microsoft 365 readiness, and get a realistic implementation timeline. We have deployed Copilot Studio agents across healthcare, logistics, banking, and SaaS organizations and know where the real complexity lives. Talk to a Copilot Studio specialist and get a scoped implementation plan within 5 business days.